Dregs, this whole period has brought up a lot of discussion and debate in regards to reputations that could be tarnished throughout all this. And we're talking about certain GMs. You know, you talk about the last two GMs that presented an offer sheet, Paul Holmgren and Jay Feaster. Jay Feaster no longer works in the management on any NHL teams. I know he still has a role in Tampa, and I think it was for
special events.
But Paul Holmgren was just Frank Cervelli said he had a conversation with him. I think it was at the draft, and he was commenting saying that his offer sheet that he created damaged his reputation. And so is that the fear that some GMs have when they enter this territory? Is like they don't want stuff to leak because they don't want to tarnish relationships?
Well, it's less about the reputation for me and potentially more about the relationships. You know, when you're preying on another team because they have cap issues, I mean, you are trying to take advantage of a situation here. And, you know, again, to bring it back to the Toronto Maple Leafs, the good fortune of the Toronto Maple Leafs is that they were able to draft and in a short period of time develop star/superstar players. The bad news is, you know, along the way, they invested cap space in players that landed in their lap, like John Tavares and others. So now they're in this predicament, and the system allows the restricted free agents to control the system as they have. So if you are a rival general manager, you haven't had the same good fortune or opportunity to draft players of the same stature. It's allowable in the collective bargaining agreement. Why wouldn't you take advantage of it? Yeah, you're going to upset some people. There's no question about that. I mean, if Kyle Dubas and the Maple Leafs have to match, if there's an offer sheet, they're not going to be happy if that number is a big number. You know, because it's going to mean they're going to be less of a team. They're going to have to move out other assets to match. And then the other part to that, and for me this is more important, if you get the player and you give up the 4 first-round picks as compensation, and the player that you've signed to the offer sheet maybe doesn't pan out as well as you were hoping with your club, well, guess what happens? I mean, you're out of work in 3 or 4 years. If that player turns out to be, you know, not as dynamic, not as significant a cornerstone piece of a franchise that's, you know, trying to turn things around and not only get back in the playoff mix, but obviously win.
Dregs, we've got Pat Morris joining us at 9:15, and I think he can help better describe this, but I just want to get your take on it.
Yeah.
Before an offer sheet is presented, is there a conversation that happens to try to work out a trade so that it doesn't turn out to be an offer sheet that's presented? Like, do GMs play the game of chicken with each other?
They have historically, and that's the upfront GM, and maybe it's not that way anymore. You know, and I feel you should ask Pat Morris about Ryan Kessler back in the day. He might have. I mean, he didn't represent Kessler at the time, but when you know, Philadelphia offer sheeted, I think it was Ryan Kessler.
It was.
Vancouver matched. I remember Dave Nonis at the time telling me that Bob Clark and the Flyers came to him ahead of time and said, we're going to offer sheet him. And, you know, Nonis said, well, don't bother because I'm going to match. I mean, at least if you're interested, make a trade offer and perhaps we can have a conversation. Mm-hmm. That was then and this is now, and I'm not sure that there's that same level of professional decency, if you will. But I'd be surprised if the general manager offer sheeting didn't at least give, you know, whatever team is being targeted here, in this case the Maple Leafs, a quick heads up that that's going to happen. And then be mindful of this. You know, people keep saying, well, you know, just because Marner is presented with an offer sheet doesn't mean he has to sign it. Well, that's accurate. But hold on a second. Do you think that he's going to wake up, you know, on Monday and go for lunch, and then when the free agency window opens, you know, unexpectedly an offer sheet is going to pop up? No. I mean, there would have been so much dialogue over the course of this interview period. I can't imagine that there would be any surprises in terms of a team presenting an offer sheet, because even before the team does that and goes through the logistics of doing it, they're going to want to know that there's a really, really strong chance Marner or whoever it is going to sign. Otherwise, why would you waste everyone's time? That's going to get out. I mean, that is going to become public. They won't announce it, but it'll leak out eventually, and then that general manager is going to be chastised for trying to do it. And then not being able to land the player. So there's a couple of reasons why it needs to be handled the right way.
TSN Hockey Insider Darren Dreger joining us. I'm listening to what you were saying about how Dave Nonis reacted with a "don't bother." And just a lot of this, it doesn't smell right to me. That to me sounds like it's collusion. So one general manager calls the other and says, I'm going to sign your player to an offer sheet, says that out of courtesy. And then the other general manager says, don't do that because we're going to have to match and I'm going to have to pay him more than I would now. To me, this is not the spirit, if I'm a player, that I would say the CBA should be intended to create.
No, I understand that, and to some degree you're right, because the pressure pushback comes in exactly what you said, Michael, that the acknowledgement of the team that has the restricted free agent who is poised to sign an offer sheet, the pushback is pretty simple. If you're giving Mitch Marner $12-13 million, whatever it would be on an offer sheet, well, if it's a 4 or 5 year term, say, now that sets the benchmark for that level of player. No different than the 5-year term to Austin Matthews at 11.5. That's why Marner's dug in. That's why everyone's waiting to see what Marner gets, because they all want a piece of the big league action here. So when you reestablish the bar, even when you do it with an offer sheet, that doesn't change. What changes is, that player is now a 5-year term at $13 million or whatever the number happens to be. So then the next wave of restricted free agents, a year from now, 2 years from now, wherever it is, when you've got some real good high-end players, that's what they're looking at. So that's what managers, for sure, the guys who are the prey, would push back with. That would do it, but if you do it and the player signs it and we don't match, then you're going to get stung in a year or two when player X, is coming out of his entry-level deal.